Ernie, what do we do tomorrow?
1 second. Way, that way like we did last week. Okay, Samech Tes. So Rabbi Eliezer Shvus de mitzvah odifle. That means violating a rabbinic prohibition for a mitzvah is not like the same like a shvus, which is only done for a rishus, your choice. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer. We learned that after you do the shechita, you can do other prohibited things like squeezing out the intestines, right? So it's doiche, even after the shechita, this yavid leim, and the mitzvah has been performed. So lo yidchu machshir mitzvah shelifnei shechita Shabbos. So the various things like schlepping the goat or the sheep to the base of mikdash should also be doiche. Amar Rakiva demali, no. In dachu machshir mitzvah shlach shechita Shabbos. The reason why you could do some rabbinic prohibitions like squeezing the intestines with a knife is because Sharei Dochsa Shchita Shabbos. The Shchita came, it was Doicha Shabbos, now things following it can be Doich as well. At that point, prior to the Shchita, the Shchita wasn't Doicha Shabbos yet. That's one answer he gives him. Dover Acher, he says, Shamayimtza Zevach Posu. We can't allow you to do things in advance, says Rabbi Kiva, because maybe you'll find that the korban is a pasul-dika korban after you shechted, and therefore you really didn't do the mitzvah, and therefore all these things that you did in preparation for the mitzvah is not correct, right? So that, though, doesn't stand on its head. Well, based on that logic, you shouldn't shecht in the first place. If you do the shechita and you find that the animal is a treifa, for example, well, you shouldn't have shechted either based on that svar, but we don't accept that. That's the first thing that Rabbi Kiva said to Rabbi Ezra, and he rejected it. Then Rabbi Kiva responded with this issue of the fact that you have to wait until shechita is actually doicha the Shabbos, and then other things are doicha as well. So Heishiv Rabbi Kiva, the Amar Hoizaya Tachiach. Rabbi Kiva proved that you're not allowed to be sprinkled with paraduma water even on Erev Pesach, even though you're going to end up not being able to eat the Korban Pesach where there's a chi of kares. Tanya Amar Rabbi Eliezer Kiva, B'shchita Heshavtani, B'shchita Te Misaso. You asked me about shchita. The person who asked me, he's gonna reach his death through shchita. So Amar Rabbi Al Tachpireni B'Shasadin. Don't. I'm your student. Don't punish me for asking a shayla. Kach mekubalim. In fact, you taught me. Hazar Shavusi, sprinkling with paraduma is a rabbinic prohibition. Ve'ena doichas Shabbos, and it's not doichas Shabbos, and everybody agrees to that. Well, if Rabbi Eliezer and Echanami taught him that, how come then eventually Rabbi Eliezer changed his mind? Rabbi Eliezer ki agmarei, because when he taught him is hazar de truma agmarei. For example, you want to eat truma, so you need hazaz paraduma to eat truma. The truma gufalo dachya Shabbos. You're not allowed to separate truma on Shabbos. But Ula says that if he would have asked him about hazaz for Korban Pesach, he would have allowed it. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Kiva nami ki usvei hazaz de truma usvei. Rabbi Kiva didn't ask him about the Korban Pesach. He asked him about truma. Shehi mitzvah v'mishum shavus. Doesn't make it fine. It's still a mitzvah, and you had a shvus to rabbanon against it. Why shouldn't you be able to violate the shvus and do the mitzvah? However, who savar hazar de pesach kamoisiflei? Rabbi Kiva thought that Rabbi Eliezer was rejecting hazar of paraduma even for the Korban Pesach. So Mosif Rabbah. So So Rabbah asked the following: Hey, Rabbi Kiva Omar. Rabbi Kiva responded, "Hazot tamim pneis tochia," that being sprinkled paraduma on a tamei mace will prove my point. Shechal shvi shelo yos b'Shabbos v'erev Pesach. Let's say a tamei mace has been counting 7 days, and the seventh day is Shabbos. That's the normal day that you get sprinkled hazot, and that Shabbos was erev Pesach. And it's shehi mitzvah v'mishum shvus ve'ena dochas Shabbos. Yet it's not dochas Shabbos, even though this mitzvah is the only mitzvah to say that has kores. So you see clearly that they were discussing hazah on Pesach, not truma. Ela vaday hazah de Pesach agamre. He was clearly dealing with the issue of hazah on Pesach. So then the more questions, my time Rabbi Yezer. So why did Rabbi Yezer hack Rabbi Kiva so strongly? They were dealing with hazah on Pesach. So Rabbi Yezer Gemara isakrle, because Rabbi Eliezer had forgotten his learning. And also Rabbi Kiva gently wanted to remind him. Rather, he didn't tell him directly what he said. He told him by asking him a shaila, he would remember what he said. Like Kurik Gemara. So the Gemara says, "V'nemalei badei." Why did he beat around the bush? Why didn't he ask him directly, what do you do? So Savr Love, it's not polite to ask your Rebbe, who might not be remembering everything, to put him on the spot like that. So we learn some derech eretz here as well. So the Gemara wants to know, Hazah my time eloid da'achis Shabbos. Why is it that when you have a tamei mace who needs sprinkling on his 7th day, and the 7th day is Shabbos, which is erev Pesach, why don't we allow paraduma to be sprinkled on? Michte til tuli ba'almu. I mean, what is it? You're throwing some water on a person. I mean, what kind of big bloch is that? Tidchi Shabbos mishum Pesach. These violations of Shabbos should be pushed aside in order to be Mekayim Korban Pesach. Amar Rabbah, Gzeira Shemit Lena Vevena Arba B'Amos Mishus Harabim. It's the famous Gzeira de Rabbah that you're not allowed to, because he might come to carry it Dalad Amos Mishus Harabim. And Rabbah says the same thing by Kriyas Shofar, by blowing the shofar. Same thing therefore, even though Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, you only have 1 day to blow the shofar. Rabbah says, Gzeira Shema Yaviren, you're going to carry it in the street to ask a question how to blow properly. Same thing with the Megillah on Purim. Shema Yaviren, if Purim falls on Shabbos, it's a Gzeira Shema Yitlena. So, Freit Gemara Rabbi Yezer Niavre, that Rabbi Yezer, who generally holds that Machshirei Mitzvah are Doicha Shabbos, let Rabbi Yezer allow you to carry it. Yom Rabbi Yezer Machshirei Mitzvah Doicha Shabbos. Amri, so we answer, that's with a person that's normally roy to do a mitzvah, because there's an obligation on him. So we allow him to be doicha machshirei mitzvah to do the mitzvah, because Rami chiyuv yaleh, there's a chiyuv placed on him. Aval hacha, right now, a person who's in a state of tumah, the gavra gufe lo chazi, he's not roy, lo Rami chiyuv, so there's no obligation on him. There's no obligation on him. He has no right to be doicha Shabbos to prepare for the mitzvah. That's the way the Gemara answers why Rabbi Yezer doesn't agree that you're allowed to be doicha hazah. Amar Rabbi Ladiv Rabbi Yezer, Cotton Bori. There was a halacha in time of Chazal. They would boil water to wash a child before Milah. We don't understand why they did it. I don't think today we have the same din. But then they could actually violate Shabbos, boil water. So based on what we just said regarding whether he has to be a gavra chazi, he has to be roy. So a cotton bori, where we say that a healthy cotton you can heat up water on Shabbos. The chazile cotton choyle ein mechamin lo chamin lavroy solamulo. But therefore, a cotton who is sick, you're not allowed to heat up for him because he's not roy. I don't understand. If he's healthy, why are you heating up water? He doesn't need it. Everyone is considered a choyle who's about to be circumcised. Echad cotton bori, echad cotton choyle. And ein mechamin lo chamin lehavro yisrael lemula b'Shabbos, dahaloi chazi. So everybody, you wouldn't be able to heat it up for him because he's not chazi. Rashi says, "Kozman shlo nirchotzu b'chamin." They're not roy because they haven't been washed. Va'afilu Rabbi Yezer tzarich lios lo mach b'chamin me'erev Shabbos. You have to wash them erev Shabbos. Esri Abaya. So Abaya asked the following question: Orel Shaloimal. You have a Jew who's not circumcised. Onush Kores Div Rabbi Eliezer. He gets Kores for not being able to eat the Korban Pesach because he could have fixed himself erev Pesach. And he didn't fix himself. Alma Rami Chiyuvi Alei. If we're giving him kares, he obviously was obligated. He's not a person, he's not a gavra chazi. Amar Rabbi Ksav Rabbi Yezer, ein shoichtin v'zorkin al tamei sheretz. Somebody who's touched a sheretz, erev Pesach. And if he goes to the mikveh, and that night, he would not be tamei anymore. But in the afternoon, when they shech the Korban Pesach, he's still tamei. So the shaila is, can you shecht and do zrika sadam on somebody who's tamei sheretz? And kol sheila b'yachid nidche, any problem whereby an individual person, he's pushed away till Pesach Sheni, so b'tzibur avdi b'tumah, the tzibur is allowed to do it if the majority of the people are tamei. B'chol milsa d'yisa b'tzibur, anything that exists by a tzibur is a b'yachid. V'chol milsa de lesa b'tzibur, anything that does not apply by a tzibur, lesa b'yachid. So the Gemara explains, arelis, the state of being uncircumcised, the ikul tzibur areli ninu. If all of Klal Yisrael were arelim, we would tell them, arminalu kumu moya lunav shaychel avida pesach. Go and circumcise yourself so you can do the Pesach. So therefore we said, anything that the tzibur you tell the yachid. So yachid nami arminalu leikum mol vavid pischa. Therefore the halacha is, if you have a person who's uncircumcised and he didn't circumcise himself before Pesach, Rishon, and he didn't resurrect himself with Pesach Sheni, he gets kares. Now, the ilomovo avid onish kares. Now, let's contrast that to Tuma, because the equal at Tzibur Tmei and Ninu, if 51% of Chaisra were Tamei, lo mit dinan alayu. We don't push him off elav di betuma. That's a case where we actually do the Korban Pesach Rishon. So in that case, Yachid Nami Potter. So if a Yachid was Tomei Sheretz, he'd be potter as well, because of the rule we made that whatever happens by the tzibur doesn't happen by the yochid. Amalei Ravuna Bred Rav Yishon Rav Hari Pesach Sheni, the lesser b'tzibur v'isa b'yochid. There is no example where Klal Yisrael as a group is pushed off this Pesach Sheni. It's only a yochid, so it ruins your rule. Amalei Shari Hazim David late tzibur b'rishon. Yeah, because the tzibur already did it b'rishon. Otherwise, if the tzibur didn't do it b'rishon, they would be pushed off the Pesach Sheni. Meis, I'll ask you a stira. Yachol lo yehei onish kores, ela shayet tor. I might think that the only person who gets kores for not doing the Korban Pesach is somebody who's tor and didn't do it, or somebody who's in town, he wasn't in China. Shelo yabadech rechoka. What about an orel, an uncircumcised Jew, the Tomei Sheretz? Somebody is Tomei, even just for one day. Ushar kol hatmeim. How do we know minayin that he also gets kores? Talmud lomer ve'aish. Now, midikom hader Tomei Sheretz. The fact that you included Tomei Sheretz in that list, ksovra and shochtim v'zorkin Tomei Sheretz, must be that you're not allowed to shecht for him, even though in the afternoon he's Tomei, but in the evening he's going to be tohor. Because the shochtim v'zorkin Tomei Sheretz lama le'laduri alei. Why would you have a problem with him? I knew Torah, he would be considered Torah that night. So right now he's not obligated. And this is not a din that applies to the tzibur, it's to be yachid. Yet we see it applies to the yachid. So in fact, we have to change what we said before. You can shech the Korban Pesach and do zrika for a person who's Tomei Sheretz, because that night he's going to be able to eat it. And the same thing, if a person is in the seventh day of counting for Tumas Meis, since that night he's going to be able to eat, we're not talking about the Erev Pesach is Shabbos, we're talking about Erev Pesach is Wednesday, so that'll work. Now, Hazor Lamai. What are you doing the Hazor for? Only Lachila, not for the Shechita. Because at the time, you cannot be Matar him with Hazor until nightfall. But who needs him to eat? If a person is part of a group and they shecht the Korban Pesach for his group, even though he doesn't end up eating, he still gets kapara. So in Cain, nimtza Pesach nishchat shelo la'achlav. But based on that, you're going to have the Korban Pesach shechted for somebody who's not eating. Yeah, but shelo la'achlav l'choylo l'zakin l'chazi. That's when you're talking about people who can't eat because they're sick or they're old, so they can't chew. So they're not roy. Aval hai, this guy, otherwise mechze chazi. He otherwise would be able to eat it. It's tekuni udalom taken. He just hasn't gone through hazah. It's a technical means. So that's why it's not considered shaloi la'achla. Then, klal omer Rabbi Kiva, Rav Yudam Rav, halachak Rabbi Kiva, that anything that you can't do from Erev Shabbos, you can do on Shabbos. Things that you can push off to Erev Shabbos, you push them off. Utnanami gabi mila. The same halacha for Rabbi Kiva was said as well. Rabbi Kiva, you need to sharpen the blade of the knife. So since you can sharpen the blade on Friday, you don't have to do it. It's not doiches Shabbos. Ain't a doiches Shabbos. But the cutting of the foreskin itself, mila, she'ef shalasois from Erev Shabbos, doiches Shabbos. That you have no breira. You can't cut it on the Friday. The Friday is the seventh day of his life. Shabbos is the eighth day of his life. So that you have to do. Rabbi Kiva. And there also he said, Allah is Rabbi Kiva. So the Gemara wants to know tzricha. Why did I have to be told this din of Rabbi Kiva, both by Pesach and both by Mila? Utzricha, I needed Yashmin Gabi Pesach. There, the various preparatory steps are not Doicha Shabbos, like carrying the animal. Because 13 covenants were not set up with the Korban Pesach. It says 13 times in the Torah bris. So Hashem made a covenant with us 13 times. Maybe a melitchi, maybe the preparatory steps should be Doicha Shabbos. The Ashmita Mila. And if I would have only asked about Mila Hasamu the Machsher Mitzvah Lo Dochel Shabbos to Leka Kares. There's no Kares because he's an 8-year-old boy, an 8-day-old boy. As long as he gets gemalt at some point before he's 13, he's not going to get Kares. But Aval Pesach, they could Kares right now, maybe a Melitchi. Maybe I think there would be Dechia. So Tzricha, we needed to be told Allah is going to be in both places. Now, there was a Korban Chagiga, which is a festive Korban, which is a shlomim, which is eaten for 2 days and 1 night, that was brought on the 14th day of Nisan to be eaten as your meal, and then the Korban Pesach was your dessert. Then, like all other Yomim Tovim, there was a Korban which is called the Korban Chagiga Chamesh Esrei. Chamesh Esrei is the first day of Yontif. So just like the first day of Sukkot, the first day of Shavuos, the first day of Pesach, there is a mitzvah to bring a Korban Chagiga. So you have dinner with your family. That's the meat that you ate. So those are 2 different Korban Chagigas that were brought. So Emasai maybe Chagiga Imo. So when was this special Chagiga Yudalit brought with the Korban Pesach? So first of all, it wasn't brought on Shabbos. It was only when the Pesach was Erev Pesach was a weekday. It wasn't brought when people were tamei. It had to be b'tahara. And it was only brought b'mu'ed when you had a lot of people subscribe to the Korban Pesach, so you were only going to get a small piece. Well, if you're only going to get a small piece, you got to bring another Korban to have your dinner on. However, Bisman Shuba b'Shabbos, if it was brought b'Shabbos, which would require violating Shabbos, well, we didn't want to violate other korbanos. And b'meruba, if, for example, there were only 3 people subscribed to this Korban Pesach, there's going to be plenty of meat. Or people were tumah, so then in those cases, we didn't want to add problems with another Korban, ein mevini mo chagiga. Now, the Chagiga is about min atzonim, min abakim, min akvasim, min ha'izim. The Korban Chagiga didn't have the various restrictions of a Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach has to be less than 1 year, has to be only sheep and goats. But the Korban Chagiga could be a sheep, could be a cow, could be goats, could be male, female, min askar min anakivas. And nechelas l'shtei yomim v'layla echad, it was eaten for 2 days like a regular shlomim. So my Tana Diktani Chagiga, who is the Tana that's bringing this subject up? Tana, it's the Tana that learned how Kavto Vavasov Lodachi Shabbos. We said that carrying the Korban Pesach on Shabbos is not Doicha Shabbos. And that same Tana, Tananami Chagiga de Lodachi Shabbos, that offering the Korban Chagiga was also not Doicha Shabbos. V'hachi Kamar, and this is what he meant to say. Emes Amivini Mo Chagiga. When do you bring with the Korban Pesach Chagiga? Bismanshu Babachol. When Erev Pesach is a weekday, when everybody is Tohor, Uvemuet. And when you're only going to have a small piece of meat because there's 100 people subscribed to this Korban Pesach. So, Om Ravashi Shmami No, Chagigas Arbosasar, Lav Choyvihi. It's not a choy. That way you don't have to bring it. So we set up, we're going to learn tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay?
Okay,
8
right.